Welcome back again, and I'm so excited for you to join me for this easy crochet cardigan today. I absolutely love the tools that we'll be using. It's so cozy and soft, and it also uses one of my favorite stitches that's super simple. It's a variation of a half double crochet. So let's talk about those supplies and get started. For this project today, you will of course need a crochet hook. I am using the size J. This is the Alpha series from Furls Crochet. I have a link for all of this in my pattern or in the description. You will also need a yarn needle to weave in any ends, some scissors of course. Stitch markers are always something I like to keep close for every project. And then of course we've got the yarn. This yarn is so squishy, so soft. I absolutely love it. It is from We Crochet. It's called Snuggle Puff. Really, you can't go wrong with this. I absolutely love it. So let's talk about this Snuggle Puff. This is an Aran heavy worsted weight. It's 70% Pima cotton, 30% nylon. And for every single ball, it's 142 yards for 50 grams. This is so awesome for areas where you want to stay cozy and nice, but that cotton is really comfortable for places that might be like where I live, which is Florida. Let's go ahead and start our project by grabbing our hook and our yarn, and we'll get going on that very first row. For this video today, I will be demonstrating the size small. All the sizes are found in the pattern. It's really just an easy adjustment per size since this is a simplistic design. We will be crocheting a large rectangle, and then we're going to be creating space for the armholes, which will come back and work later. So it's a really fun garment if you've never made one, and it's really not that intimidating. So for the size small, I'm going to start by chaining 109, or if you prefer, you can go ahead and do a foundation chain of 108. If you have chained 109, we're going to go ahead in the second chain from the hook, and we're going to do a half double crochet. And I do like stitch markers just so that I don't have to, go back later and figure out what I did. It's definitely a great way to make sure that you know how many stitches you have. So I love to place stitch markers at least until I really get going on the first stitch of every single row, and that way I know I am accurate on my stitch count. So we're going to continue to do half double crochets across this row, and at the end of row 1 we have 108 stitches. Now for row 2, we can go ahead and chain 1. I'm only going to chain 1, not 2, since we're just working in the half double crochets. And we are going to do a half double crochet into the back loop only. And we're going to go ahead and mark that stitch so we can keep track of our rows. And now for the next stitch, I'm going to half double crochet into the front loop only, and that will be our repeat across. I'll half double crochet into the back loop only, and then the front loop only. Double crochet into the back loop only, and then the front loop only. This is our pattern repeat across for this row, so work that all the way across your stitches. Now for row 3, we're working in the same half double crochet stitch, but we're simply going to be working in the opposite loop from the stitch in the row below. So we can chain 1, and in this very first stitch, since the last stitch in this row was worked in the front loop, then on this side it is worked in the back loop. So what we'll want to do is we will want to work in the front loop for this very first stitch. We're going opposite. And this one looks like it's worked with this side facing. It would be the front, so we want to work the back loop. And that's how we're going to work all the way across. We're just going to alternate between the front loop and the back loop, making sure that it is opposite from the row below. Now, if you are working in even and odd, no matter what you're doing, all you have to make sure you're keeping track of is working opposite from the stitch below. So we're going to use that as our established stitch pattern, and we're going to build our rows until we get to the point where we need to split for the arms. So this section will work until the underarm. So what you will need to do next in order to create the length from the underarm down is to crochet row after row until you have the fabric that you like. I love the drape on this. I love how it's turning out. But at this point, before you split and we start working on the armholes, go ahead and hold this up to you, especially along the back, right where about your armhole hits, and see if it hits you where you want it to hit you. You can either decrease or increase the amount of rows to get what you like. Everyone's different. I, rarely meet someone who's the exact same height as I am, and I have a very long torso. So something that might be sized for me may not be sized correctly for you when it comes to customization. So determine where you want this to hit you at the base, and then go ahead and stop. And it's time to split for the arms. All right, so we're taking this long rectangle here and we are making space for the armholes. We're gonna work our first section, and then we'll come work the across the back section, and then we'll work our last section over here. You'll see that I've thrown in some extra stitch markers just because I like the visual and I want you to have a visual for this for a second. We're gonna start by, for the size small, working 29 stitches from the right side in. I'm going to work just those stitches. And then we'll come back and work the stitches in here, but we'll be skipping some for underneath the arms, and then we'll work our last panel section. So let's go ahead and work this first row. Now we'll be working it in the established stitch pattern, so opposite from whatever was the row below in terms of the front loop and the back loop, and just keeping that nice textured fabric. I really like how it's turning out, so I want to keep working in that established stitch. I still like to place a stitch marker at the beginning stitch in my row, that way I know where I'm at. And now I'm simply going to do my established stitch to the stitch marker. So once you get to this point, you will turn and continue to work in rows. So you're going to work those stitches in rows for a total of 15 rows. You can always go ahead and hold this up to yourself at your top shoulder to make sure that this arm depth works for you. And then when you're done with that, we're going to fasten off. Since this is our very first section, we have 2 more to do, and we're going to start our next section. Now what's important is each time that you're starting a new section, you want to make sure that the right side of this is facing you in terms of this very first row here. You can always check and see this row right here needs to match the next time you start so that the pattern works out consistently. What we're going to do now is we are going to skip 2 stitches. So we're going to skip 2 stitches from this panel. We're going to leave those 2 stitches blank, and we're going to connect our yarn to the stitch after that. So we're going to be now working this shoulder area in between our 2 armholes. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my yarn here. I'm going to chain 1, and then we're going to be working in pattern. So you'll want to do opposite from whatever stitch that you're working into. And I'm going to be working for 46 stitches across for this center shoulder panel. So just going to keep working in the stitch pattern, working the opposite front loop or back loop, half double crochets from the row below. And I'm going to do this for 46 stitches. Now that I've worked for 46 stitches, it is time for us to turn. And I'm going to keep working this panel in rows until I've worked it for a total of 15 rows to match this first panel. So go ahead and work the 15 rows of 46 stitches for this center shoulder panel. So now that I've worked the center back panel for 15 rows, we can go ahead and we can fasten that off. And now we're going to work the very last section for these panels. And it's going to be just like this first one. It's going to be over here. We're going to skip 2 stitches, and then we're going to join in the next and work the last 29 stitches in 15 rows. So the exact same as this first one. So go ahead and work that last panel for 15 rows, then come on back. So now we have our 3 panels, and I have not fastened off this last panel because we're going to go ahead and turn. So what we will be doing next is we're going to go back to the amount of stitches we had here, which was 108, and we're going to be working across here, chaining 2 to make up for the stitches we skipped at every single gap. So let's go ahead and turn our work. So I'm going to chain 1 and continue working in the established stitch pattern. So my very first stitch will be in the front loop, for this size. And I'm just going to keep working in that pattern across the first panel. So now that I've worked across the first panel, I'm going to go ahead and chain 2. This will help with this space for the arm because we skipped 2 down here. So just chain 2. And now I'm going to keep working in pattern for this section as well. So you're just going to look at the next stitch and work the opposite of the stitch below in terms of the front loop or the back loop with that half double crochet. So now we're going to work in the established stitch pattern across the back shoulder panel. And now that I've worked across this center back across the shoulder panel, it is now time to chain 2 again. So we're going to make up for those 2 stitches we skipped here. So I'm going to chain 2 and continue working across this last panel in the stitch pattern. And then when you get to the end, we'll talk about the next steps. And now that we've worked across all the 3 panels, we're back to 108 stitches, and it's time for us to turn and do some repeats. We are going to be working across all 108 stitches in the established stitch pattern to build up some area above the armholes. So here you can see with the repeats, I did 11 rows after I did that chain row. So I have 11 rows after this opening of the arm. You can always try this on at this point. Stick your arms through here and see if you like this much extra around the neck. If you want a thicker collar, feel free to add more rows. If not, you can take away. And then when you're at the end of adding those repeats, we can go ahead and fasten off. Once you've fastened off, we're going to add a bit more detail on each side. It's really simple. We're just going to work in half double crochet, but you're going to go ahead and turn your work, and with the right side facing you, I'm starting at the bottom of this one side. So with the right side facing me, I want to slip stitch up the side of this so that we have a really nice clean lined join here. So I'm going to join my yarn and chain 1, and I'm going to be slip stitching 3 stitches for every 2 rows. So you'll do 2 stitches in a row, then 1 stitch in a row. So you'll do 3 stitches every 2 rows up the side of this in slip stitches. When we work slip stitches this way, when we work back down this row, it creates this really nice edge to work into when you're starting to work edge off of a row. So slip stitch up the side of this, 3 stitches per 2 rows. So now that I've worked the slip stitches all the way up this one side, I'm going to turn my work, and now we're going to be working into those slip stitches back down. So we're going to be doing just regular half double crochets. I'm going to chain 1 and then half double crochet into each slip stitch back down, and that's all we're going to do for these rows here to add a little bit of a different texture detail and extend out the front. Once again, this is a great spot to do adjustments that you want. You can always try it on and see how you like it and see the depth you want to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and work this up until I find the right depth for me. I've gone ahead and done 5 rows of half double crochet on each side of this cardigan. It really adds a nice front detail, even though it's a simple stitch, and it's also reversible, which is what we want since the front of this will kind of fold back and forth and lay really nice as we wear it. So now it's time for us to go ahead and tackle those sleeves. I just want to make a note here that I tried this on as is without doing the sleeves, and I loved it as a vest. I think I kind of want to make another one as a vest. So if you want to keep it as a vest, just slip stitch around the opening and wear. But that's totally up to you, just one more way to customize this garment. Now it's time for us to slip stitch around this opening, and we'll start by joining our yarn to one of these open stitches underneath the arm because we do want to hide seams if possible. So join your yarn and chain 1. And now we're going to be slip stitching around the inside of this opening similar to we did on the sides. For this one, I simply use the stitches at the bottom and the top, but on each side, I worked 3 stitches for every 2 rows on the sides approximately. A great way to determine how to place your stitches is to grab a couple of stitch markers. You can place one at the top and you can place one at the bottom and know that you need half your stitches between each stitch marker. You can even go a step further and you can place 4 stitch markers and split the amount of stitches into 4 and know in between each one of those markers you'll need a fourth of your stitches around. So go ahead and slip stitch 54 stitches around this opening and then come on back. Now that we've slip stitched 54 stitches around, we're going to go ahead and work these slip stitches in our established stitch pattern. So grab a stitch marker because for these rounds, we are going to be joining and then turning at the end of every single round. So marking that very first stitch is really important to keep track of which round you're on in order to turn with this, to join with the slip stitch and then turn at the end of the round. So go ahead and work in the established stitch pattern for the 54 stitches. So here we are at the end of our first round working in our established stitch pattern, and it's time to slip stitch to join to that very first stitch, and then we are going to turn our work to work these rounds. So now that we've turned and chained 1, it's time to start working in our established stitch pattern again, and remember we're simply working the opposite from the round below. Now for round 3, we're going to start by decreasing our sleeves so that they taper. It's important to grab a stitch marker for this so you know the first stitch in your round. So we'll start by doing a half double crochet 3 together. Now if you want to try to do these in stitch pattern, you can, but really it's not necessary. Just do a regular half double crochet 3 together. Now the next thing I want you to do is maybe grab a second stitch marker. So I'm going to mark this as the first stitch of my round, and then I'm going to grab a second stitch marker and I'm going to mark the front of this stitch. The reason why I do this is it helps me be a little bit lazy. So as I'm working this from here on out, we are going to be decreasing every 3rd round. This stitch marker on the front helps me realize where I need to decrease again at a quick visual glance. I know which round I last decreased on, and I know I need to decrease on the next 3rd round. So then let's go ahead and talk about how many rounds we will be decreasing and then how many rounds total we will have. So I've gone ahead and finished the other sleeve so that we can see where we are headed on this. So for this, we are going to be tapering the sleeve down by decreasing every 3rd round. So we do a half double crochet 3 together on every 3rd round. We will have a total of 36 rounds, but we're only going to decrease to 32 stitches. So continue decreasing every 3rd round until you get to 32 stitches, and then work the remaining rounds until you reach 36 total rounds. And then after that, we'll come back and we'll talk about how to work the cuff on the end of the sleeve. Now that we've got our sleeve decreased in the amount of rows that we need, we are going to go ahead and do the cuff. This will be worked in rows across the end of this sleeve. To start, we are going to chain 8. And now we are going to slip stitch in the second chain from the hook and across all the other chains for a total of 7 slip stitches. And now we're going to be working 2 slip stitches along the edge of this sleeve and turning. And now we're going to skip the 2 slip stitches from the bottom of the sleeve, and in the back loop only, we will be slip stitching 7. And now we're going to turn again, so we're working in rows, and we are going to chain 1, and in the back loops only, we are going to slip stitch 7. So we're just repeating these 2 rows where we slip stitch 7 in the back loop, and then we'll slip stitch 2 from the sleeve edge, turn, skip the 2 from the sleeve edge, and slip stitch 7, turn, chain 1, and start again. So it's just these 2 rows over and over, working in those back loops for every single row, and it creates a ribbed cuff. Once you've done this all the way around the edge of the sleeve and you get back to this point, we'll go over on how to join your first row with your last row. So now that we've worked all the way around, I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then start the stitch the way I would normally for a slip stitch, but then I'm also going to be inserting my hook into this first loop on the first row. And then I yarn over and slip stitch those 2 loops together. So the back loop of my current row, the loop from the first row, and then slip stitch those together. And that creates a really nice join. Do it all the way down for all 7 stitches. Then you can go ahead and fasten off and then weave in your ends and then do the same for the other sleeve. And just like that, you've got a nice, really nice flexible fabric cardigan for you to wear during the fall or even the winter. I love wearing layers, and this is an awesome layer to throw on. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow along for more fun projects soon.